Better the environment, one homemade upcycled beeswax wrap at a time. Hi everybody, welcome back to Zevaulia with me, Zeva. I hope you have had a great week so far. In this video, I would like to share with you my tips and tricks on how to make your very own beeswax wrap at home. Beeswax wraps have been around for decades. It has been passed down from generation to generation. But even that, not many people know about this yet. There are also beeswax wraps that you can buy in your grocery store, supermarket. But of course, if you could actually make your very own beeswax wraps at home, why not? And especially, this will teach you how to upcycle any spare fabric that you have lying around the house, rather than throwing it away. If it still looks good and it still has great and durable texture, why not turn it into a beeswax wraps? So I'm going to show you how. So why beeswax? Why not other types of wax? For example, paraffin wax or the usual candle wax. Don't use them, by the way, because those options are not as hygienic and not as antibacterial as beeswax are. If you want to know the benefits of honey and beeswax, you can go to one of my earlier videos. I discussed all about the benefits of honey there. But for the purpose of this video, I would like to underline the importance of the antibacterial properties that beeswax have. So when you coat the fabric that you will use for the beeswax wrap, it will also give that antibacterial shield whenever, for example, you want to cover food with the wrap, because you don't want to get any nasty bits in there, right? So that coating is very safe to use for all ages, for all foods and beverages that you would like to cover. Now let's get to the upcycling part. Now before I break down to you all the tools and ingredients that you will need to make your very own beeswax wraps, let's get to the upcycling part. So here I have some old fabrics that are still in very good condition that I could reuse, I could upcycle into the beeswax wraps. Now to give you some ideas of what you can also use, this is my Bali t-shirt, this is an old pashmina or headscarf, this is an old, I don't know what it's called in English. In Bahasa Indonesia, it's a sarung guling. This one here is a bit thicker. It's a tea towel. One last example, this is my batik dress. So if you have any dresses that you don't use anymore, or blouses, or any other tops that aren't t-shirts, you can also use that. A very important tip to keep in mind is that before you cover any of your fabric with beeswax, you need to wash it first. So make sure that you wash your fabrics first. These are the main tools and other items you need to prepare for methods 1 and 2. Take note. Prepare any fabric or clothes you have that you would like to upcycle. If you only want to use one pattern or use one piece of fabric or clothes, it's also okay. This is a pinking shears or zigzag scissors, especially for fabric. This is optional, but I would highly recommend it because it will prevent fraying at the sides and make the beeswax wrap last longer. Prepare a fabric pencil to help draw the patterns. This is optional, but if you want to label your wraps, prepare a non-toxic marker or crayons in any color you want. To make specific patterns, use any of your kitchenware to get an idea of the size of the beeswax wraps you need. You can also use a ruler for square and rectangular shapes, or go with your gut like how I usually do. Make the patterns that you want by drawing it on the fabric using, for example, your bowl. If the beeswax is meant to cover that bowl, leave approximately 3 centimeters of fabric around the outside border of the pattern, or estimate and draw the border a few centimeters beyond. You will cut around that later. If it's meant to cover something smaller, no need to leave some extra space around the pattern. This is optional. If you want to label the wrappers, that's the next step. This can come in handy when you want to easily know what's inside the item you're wrapping if the item isn't see-through, or you simply don't want to memorize which pattern is for which item. It can also be a way to label who owns what. It's also okay if you just don't want to label them at all. These are the ingredients that you need to prepare for methods 1 and 2. Take note. You will need a block of beeswax. Beeswax has a high melting point and is antibacterial. I bought mine from a local farmer. This one here is about 100 grams. I will be using 2 of these, 1 block for each method. Remember, there will be 2 methods in this video. The beeswax can be the only ingredient actually, but if you want a better quality beeswax wrap, here's the first secret tip. Prepare some jojoba oil. You will only need a few drops per wrap. It will help the wrap to not quickly go rancid and have a longer shelf life because it's antibacterial. It will also tone down the beeswax, making it softer and more flexible. The second secret tip is pine resin. It will add stickiness to the wrap so it will adhere to the edges of your kitchenware much better. It will also decrease cracking of the beeswax. Don't forget to ground it until quite smooth. The amount of pine resin you will need per wrap won't be as much as the beeswax. Let's get started with the first method that you can choose after preparing step 1 and 2 beforehand. These are the tools and other items you need to prepare for method 1. Take note. You will need an iron, a grater, a spare towel, 1 medium baking paper sheet, a baking tray, and a cutting mat for extra protection. After you put the spare towel over the cutting mat, put the baking tray on it. This is a tip from me. I'm using a baking tray to create less mess, and I don't really want to deal with too much flaked wax residue on my towel if I don't use it. This gives a cleaner experience. So the baking paper sheet will stay in place. Stick a double tape on the middle and right-left sides of the baking tray. This really helps, trust me. Place the baking paper sheet over the baking tray and stick it on. I'm using a rectangular shape, and to not be too wasteful, 1 sheet is enough. If it eventually gets ripped in the process, then add a fresh sheet. As you can see, the vertical placement of the sheet creates a fold, so the bottom parts cover the tray and the upper part cover the fabric. Start grating the beeswax bit by bit. You don't need to wax all the block in one go. Do it partially. You can always grate more later when needed. If you're making smaller size wraps that fits in your baking tray, you can make a few at once. It saves time and electrical energy. If it's a larger size, make it one at a time. My measurement for 1 sheet of beeswax wrap is 2 by 1, 2 for beeswax and 1 for pine resin. Use this ratio, or you can also try what works out for you too. If you're just using beeswax without the pine resin and jojoba oil, just put in enough amount of grated beeswax on each wrap and you're all good too. Cover the tray with the upper section of the baking tray and start ironing to melt all the ingredients into the fabric. This will cover the fabric with the ingredients on both sides. When the fabric has absorbed enough, you can see the fabric's pattern appear on the paper. Lift the upper section carefully yet swiftly and pull the fabric off. If the fabric gets stuck dry on the paper, it means you need to reapply heat and try to peel it off again. Don't worry, you won't burn your hands while doing this. Once peeled, air dry the fabric by swaying your hands. Now onto the second option, the second method. You can choose this after preparing step 1 and 2 beforehand. These are the tools and other items you need to prepare for method 2. Take note. I've set up a simple DIY double broiler to help melt the beeswax and pine resin. There is also a baking tray and baking paper sheet on top of it and a baking brush. Place fabric on the baking tray and baking paper. Prepare some water in the pan and let's start melting. In goes the beeswax, and in goes the pine resin. Since I'm melting in bulk, the 2 by 1 ratio works not per sheet but per bulk, 2 for the beeswax and 1 for the pine resin. Once all 2 ingredients are melted, lather it all over the fabric with a baking brush. It's okay that it will look uneven with parts drying quicker than the other. Keep swiping until enough. We will press it down later with an iron. Yes, this melting technique substitutes the grating technique of method 1. The melting technique also gives a more smoother finish than the grating technique because the mix of ingredients really seeps into the fabric. Let's start ironing, peeling, and air drying. Set your beeswax wraps by air drying it a little longer on a drying rack or anywhere dry. Here's a tutorial on how to place your beeswax wrap on a large ball. Press the edges with your fingers and go around it over and over while tucking the folds downwards. The warmth of your hands through your body heat will help set the beeswax wrap by activating its natural adhesives. If, for example, you have a longer aged beeswax wrap that's a bit stiff, reactivate its adhesive ability by scrunching it up first. Let's wrap some tomatoes and chilies. How about packing a quick lunch? For future note, if you want to clean your beeswax, run it under cold water. By the way, if you see whitish stuff, that's okay. It's just dried parts of the beeswax. If you want to prime up the condition of your beeswax wrap, just iron it again in between 2 layers of a sheet of baking paper. So those are my 2 methods, 2 tips on how to make your very own beeswax wraps at home. We need to keep in mind that there are already so many plastic and microplastic out there. We don't need to put more pressure on Mother Earth, and this is one of the ways, simple ways but effective ways on how to reduce your plastic consumption in your household. Do share this video around so more people will be aware of this method. And if you want to know more about eco-friendly living and also environmental discussions, feel free to check my channel and even subscribe and join the tribe. See you in the next video.